I'm Michael Hayes. I'm 34, and on the most important day of my brother's life, I discovered my own family had deliberately erased me from it. Before I tell you how a 4-star general turned that humiliation into a moment that shattered their world, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It's good to know who's out there listening. The drive across the Chesapeake Bay Bridge always felt like a transition. The sprawling steel structure, a man-made marvel against the vast blue canvas of the sky and water, was supposed to lead to Annapolis, a place of history, honor, and for my family, legacy. That May morning was postcard perfect, the sun glinting off the waves in a way that should have felt hopeful. But for me, it was just a long, familiar road to a place where I never quite belonged. I was heading to the Naval Academy for my younger brother Ethan's award ceremony. In the Hayes family, military events were our version of holiday gatherings. They were mandatory, steeped in tradition, and always humming with the low-frequency vibration of unspoken tensions. My family tree isn't just a family tree. It's a chain of command. My father, retired Captain David Hayes, is the patriarch, a man forged in the crucible of naval warfare, a man whose respect was measured in tonnage and firepower. His son, my younger brother Ethan, was the perfect heir. He had the sharp jawline, the easy smile, and the decorated uniform of a storybook hero. He was everything my father valued. Then there was me, the anomaly, the son who chose the shadows over the sea. I went into intelligence. To my father, this was a source of quiet, constant shame. My world of secure, windowless rooms and silent data streams was, in his words, a glorified clerical job. I wasn't a warrior. I was a desk jockey, a paper pusher, a man playing with abstractions while real men, like Ethan, commanded ships and faced tangible dangers. My mother, Margaret, was the silent partner in this assessment. Her pride in Ethan was always a little too loud, her questions about my work always a little too vague, as if she were afraid the details might bore her. This dynamic was the established truth of our lives. I had learned to live with it, to build my own world away from their judgment. But that day, they decided to make that truth brutally public. I pulled up to the main security gate of the academy, the iconic brick buildings and manicured lawns spreading out before me. I handed my military ID to the guard at the booth. He was an older man, a Marine veteran by the look of his posture and the faded globe and anchor tattoo on his forearm. He glanced at my ID, then at a printed list on a clipboard. He frowned. "Hayes Michael," he read, then scanned the list again. He typed my name into his computer terminal. The frown deepened. "I'm sorry, sir. You're not on the guest list for the ceremony." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't a simple mistake. This was deliberate. "That can't be right," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm Captain Michael Hayes. The award recipient, Commander Ethan Hayes, is my brother." The guard looked genuinely apologetic. "I see his name right here, sir. And a Captain David Hayes, a Margaret Hayes, a Jessica Hayes. But there's no Captain Michael Hayes on the list. I can't let you through without authorization." The roar of a powerful engine announced their arrival. A black sedan, polished to a mirror shine, pulled up behind my modest car. My family. My father emerged first, his posture as rigid as a ship's mast. My mother followed, a portrait of practiced elegance. Then Ethan, resplendent in his dress whites, his wife Jessica clinging to his arm like a trophy. He strode toward the gate, a smug, questioning look on his face. "What's the problem, Mike? Having trouble?" The guard, looking increasingly uncomfortable, answered for me. "His name isn't on the list, Commander." Ethan laughed. It was a loud, ugly sound that echoed in the quiet morning air. It was a performance for the benefit of the guard, for his wife, for the world. "Not on the list? See, I told you," he said, turning to our parents with a theatrical shrug. "What's the point of him even being here? He just shuffles papers in some basement in D.C." He then turned his full attention back to me, his voice dripping with a casual cruelty that was worse than any shout. "It's a high-security event, Mike. They can't just let anyone in." My father said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence was his endorsement. He simply gave me a dismissive glance, a look that said, "This is your place." Outside, my mother offered a tight, pained smile that was a masterpiece of non-support. And then, as if I had ceased to exist, they turned and walked toward the ceremony grounds, leaving me standing in the heat, the dust, and the exhaust fumes of their departure. They had not just forgotten me. They had actively uninvited me. They had erased me. I stood there for a long moment, the guard studiously avoiding my gaze. I wasn't angry. The time for anger was long past. What I felt was a profound, chilling clarity, a resolve that settled deep in my bones. They thought they had put me in my place. They had no idea I was about to put them in theirs. You have to understand, the scene at the gate wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of 1,000 smaller cuts, a lifetime of being weighed, measured, and found wanting on the Hayes family scale. To grasp the magnitude of what was about to happen, you need to journey back with me to see the foundation of this dysfunctional monument they called a family. I found a spot under a sprawling oak tree, its branches offering a merciful shade from the climbing sun. From this vantage point, I could see the whole affair without being part of it. The guests, a sea of dress uniforms and colorful dresses, mingled on the pristine lawn. My family was holding court, of course. My father, animated and proud, telling a story to a circle of admirers, his hand resting possessively on Ethan's shoulder. It was a tableau I had seen my entire life. My phone buzzed with a secured text. I knew the number by heart. "Everything is in place. Are you sure about this, Michael? There's no turning back after today." It was General Miller, my commanding officer, a man who didn't just command fleets but shaped global military policy. His concern was genuine, a stark contrast to my own family's indifference. I typed back, my thumb steady. "I'm sure, General. The truth has been patient long enough. It's time." His reply was swift. "Understood. The overture is over. Time for the symphony." A symphony, an apt word for a production that had been composed over decades. Each painful memory was a note, each slight arrest, building towards this explosive crescendo. My mind drifted, unbidden, to my 17th birthday. It's funny the things you remember. I don't recall a cake or presents. I recall the smell of my father's study, old books, wood polish, and stale cigar smoke. I had just received the notification letter. I had won the national cryptography competition. Not just won, but shattered the previous record for solving the final problem, a complex encryption model that had stumped university-level teams. It felt like I had unlocked a secret chamber in my own mind. I ran to my father's study, the letter clutched in my hand like a holy relic. "Dad? I did it. I won." He glanced up from a biography of Admiral Nimitz, his eyes holding a familiar, mild impatience. "Won what, son?" "The cryptography competition. The national one. I came in first place in the country." He took the letter, his eyes scanning it briefly. He handed it back. He grunted. A sound that was a masterclass in dismissal. Puzzles. Good for keeping the mind sharp, I suppose. He closed the book, marking his page. He looked past me, his focus already elsewhere. "Ethan ran a 6-minute mile today. Personal best. The scouts from the academy are going to be very impressed with his physical scores at the preliminary interviews. That boy has command presence. You can see it already." And that was it. My achievement, a feat of pure intellect that had been recognized on a national level, was dismissed as a puzzle. In the world of Captain David Hayes, value was measured in physical prowess, in miles run and weights lifted. My mind was a hobby. Ethan's body was a weapon. I walked out of his study that day with a cold, hard piece of knowledge lodged in my heart. I could cure cancer, and my father would be more impressed if Ethan did an extra set of pull-ups. A few weeks after that crushing dismissal, another letter arrived. This one was different. It was on heavy, cream-colored stationery, bearing the crest of a retired 4-star admiral. James Thompson, a living legend in the intelligence community, a friend of my grandfather's, and, as it turned out, one of the final judges for the competition. He had invited me to his home near Alexandria. His house was the antithesis of my father's, where our walls were adorned with paintings of naval battles and polished metals. His were covered in bookshelves that groaned under the weight of history, philosophy, and science. Ancient maps, crisscrossed with his own annotations, hung like tapestries. He was a small, bird-like man with eyes that seemed to strip away all pretense. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He had my final paper from the competition on his desk. "Explain this to me," he said, pointing to a complex string of my code. "Your approach to the multi-layered encryption. It's not just clever. It's elegant. Where did you learn to think like this?" For 3 hours, we didn't talk about my family or my future. We talked about ideas, about the nature of information, the history of spycraft, the ethics of intelligence. He listened. He actually listened. He challenged my assumptions, pushed my logic, and treated me not as a boy, but as a colleague. Finally, he leaned back in his vast leather chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Michael," he said, his voice quiet but carrying immense weight, "your father is a fine sailor, a warrior. He understands the visible world, the ship, the gun, the horizon. It's an honorable world." He paused, gesturing to the maps around him. "But the wars of the future, the ones that will truly define the fate of nations, will be won here." He tapped his temple. "They will be won in the silent, invisible realm of information. They'll be won by people who can see the patterns in the noise, who can find the truth in a hurricane of lies." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "Don't you ever let anyone, not even your father, tell you that your mind isn't a weapon. It is the most powerful weapon humanity has ever devised. Not all warriors carry a rifle, son. Some of us carry the truth. And the truth, in the right hands at the right time, is more devastating than any bomb." That conversation didn't just give me a career path. It gave me a sense of self. It was the armor I needed to navigate the years ahead. With Admiral Thompson's sponsorship, I entered the Navy and disappeared into the world he had described. The world of secure facilities, of the tank, where my team and I fought our silent wars. A movement near the VIP section brought me back to the present. My Uncle Robert had arrived. He was my father's younger brother, a retired Navy commander, and the only person in the family who saw me. He exchanged a stiff, obligatory nod with my father, then found his seat. He was General Miller's personal guest. Our eyes met across the crowded lawn, and he gave me a nearly imperceptible nod of solidarity. He was here as a witness. He knew what today was about. The memory of another family gathering years ago flashed in my mind. The annual 4th of July barbecue. The smell of hot dogs on the grill. The sound of kids laughing. The suffocating humidity of a Virginia summer. Ethan, recently promoted, was holding court, telling a dramatic story about a training exercise in the South China Sea. My father was listening with rapt attention, beaming with pride. I had just received word that an intelligence brief my small team had prepared had directly led to the disruption of a major terror funding network. It was a huge, unseen victory. Uncle Robert, who still had contacts in the community, had heard about it. He came over to me, a beer in his hand, and clapped me on the shoulder. "Heard about the Al-Fayed network, Mike," he said in a low voice. "Damn fine work. You should be proud." Then he turned to my father. "David, you hear what Mike's team pulled off? They basically dismantled a whole terror financing operation without firing a shot." My father's face went rigid. The pleasant, proud father mask dropped. He jabbed a fork at a steak on the grill. "It's desk work, Robert," he said, his voice flat and dismissive. "It's important, I'm sure, but it's not command. It's not leading men. It's not the same." Uncle Robert's face flushed with anger. "For God's sake, David, are you that blind? His work keeps those men you're so proud of from sailing into an ambush. It saves lives. How many lives have to be saved quietly before it counts in your book?" "I know what a hero looks like," my father said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl that ended all debate. "And it doesn't involve staring at a computer screen." A horrible silence fell over the patio. My mother quickly bustled in, asking who wanted dessert. The subject was changed. The crisis was averted. But the chasm between my father and his brother had become permanent. And I was left standing on one side, with my one lonely ally. Now, back at the academy, I watched my brother take the stage to accept his award. A commendation medal. A respectable honor for meritorious service. He launched into his acceptance speech and I braced myself. He thanked our father for being his inspiration, the model of a naval officer. He thanked our mother for her unwavering support. He thanked his wife, his commanding officer, his fellow sailors. He even gave a shout-out to his high school football coach. He never said my name. It was a deliberate, final act of erasure. In his moment of glory, he made it clear. He had no brother. Not one worth mentioning. As the polite applause filled the air, I felt the last vestiges of hurt burn away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't about revenge. I was past that. This was about restoring a fundamental truth. This was about balancing the scales that had been so heavily weighted against me for 34 years. My phone buzzed again. A final message from my team. It was a single, recently declassified document. A damage assessment report for a coastal missile battery that had been mysteriously disabled by a localized cyber anomaly 2 years prior. Attached was a note. The USS Courageous was their primary target. You were right on time, sir. I looked at Ethan, the hero, basking in the warm glow of applause. He was alive because of a decision I made in a cold, dark room 6,000 miles away. He had no idea, but he was about to. The symphony was about to begin. The applause for Ethan finally faded, leaving a warm, self-congratulatory hum in the air. He walked off the stage with a practiced humility, straight into our father's proud embrace. My mother looked on, dabbing at the corners of her eyes with a lace handkerchief. It was the perfect picture of a perfect military family, a Rockwell painting come to life. And I was the ghost in the machine, the unseen variable about to disrupt the entire equation. Most award ceremonies have a natural rhythm. An award is given, the recipient says a few words, and a senior officer offers a concluding remark. But General Miller didn't conclude. After shaking Ethan's hand, he remained at the podium. He adjusted the microphone, and the simple, deliberate movement commanded the attention of the entire assembly. A respectful quiet settled over the crowd. "Thank you, Commander Hayes," the general began, his voice a deep baritone that needed no amplification but got it anyway. A fine example of meritorious service. The kind of service that is the very backbone of our Navy. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the sea of uniforms and proud families. My own family was preening, soaking in the praise as if it were their own. Ethan stood a little taller, a confident smirk playing on his lips, clearly expecting more accolades. Then the general's tone shifted. The warmth receded, replaced by a gravitas that felt like a change in atmospheric pressure. Today, we rightly celebrate the visible. We celebrate the service we can see and touch. The service of sailors on the decks of our mighty ships, facing the fury of the sea and the threats of our adversaries. This is the bedrock of naval power. It is honorable, it is courageous, and it is essential. He paused again, and this time the silence was deeper, more focused. It was the silence of anticipation. But there are other battlefields, he continued, his voice lowering slightly, forcing the audience to lean in. Battlefields that are not mapped on any chart. They are fought not on the high seas, but in the silent, invisible currents of information that connect and divide our world. They are fought in the whispers of scrambled data, in the shadows of cyberspace. I saw my father shift uncomfortably in his VIP seat. This was the kind of abstract talk he despised. It was my world, the world he considered unreal. His brow, which had been smooth with pride, now furrowed with a familiar impatience. My mother glanced at him, her smile faltering, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "This unseen war," the general said, his voice rising again, imbued with a cold authority, "has no front lines and offers no parades. A victory in this war is not marked by a captured territory, but by a crisis that is averted. It's marked by a terrorist plot that never materializes, by a ship that never sails into a perfectly laid trap, by thousands of sons and daughters who come home safely, never knowing how close they came to not coming home at all. His words were a guided missile, and as he spoke, my mind was violently yanked back across 2 years to the cold, humming heart of my world. The memory was not a soft, faded photograph. It was a high-definition, full-sensory immersion. The air in the tank was always chilled to 65 degrees, a constant defense against the heat generated by the racks of humming supercomputers that were the engines of our world. The only light came from the giant, curved wall of monitors displaying a constant, overwhelming river of global data. The room was a cathedral of information, and my team and I were its high priests. Samantha Rodriguez, my lead analyst and a certified genius with a keyboard, her face illuminated by cascading lines of code, suddenly sat bolt upright. "Sir, I've got something. The North Korean algorithm we've been tracking on the dark web. It's active, but it's not coming from Pyongyang. The signature is being bounced through a dozen proxies, but the origin, it's a splinter faction in the Gulf. For the past 72 hours, we had been running on fumes and caffeine, hunting a ghost. A rogue arms dealer had sold a battery of advanced GPS-jamming coastal missiles, and we had lost the signal after the handover. Now it had reappeared. They're using a ghost protocol to mask the final activation sequence," I said, my eyes glued to the main strategic map. My fingers flew across my own console, pulling up satellite thermal imaging. "We're not looking for the missile anymore. We're looking for the heat signature of the men turning it on." "Found it," Marcus Jackson, my unflappable operations specialist, announced from his station. His voice was calm, but I could hear the underlying urgency. "Triangulating their sat phone uplink. They're getting sloppy, getting arrogant. They think they're invisible." A red circle bloomed on the map, pinpointing a desolate stretch of coastline. At the exact same moment, on an adjacent screen displaying friendly naval traffic, my blood turned to ice. A single blue icon, representing a U.S. Navy destroyer, was on a direct intercept course with the newly identified kill zone. His patrol route, scheduled weeks in advance, was a death sentence. I zoomed in on the icon. The designation appeared in stark white letters. USS Courageous. Ethan's ship, my brother, the golden child, the family hero, was sailing blissfully into an ambush laid by a weapon system no one in the fleet even knew was active. The irony was a physical sickness in my throat. The desk jockey was the only person on Earth who could see the digital torpedo aimed at his brother's heart. My own heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, primal drumbeat. For one terrifying second, I wasn't Captain Michael Hayes, USN. I was just a brother. I saw Ethan's face, not the smug man at the gate, but the kid I grew up with. I saw my mother's face if she ever got that knock on the door. Sam's voice cut through the haze. "Sir, we have an asset in the kill zone. Your orders." She didn't know the personal connection. To her, it was a tactical problem. An asset. I closed my eyes. Inhale. Exhale. The family drama, the decades of insults, the searing humiliation from just hours ago. It all evaporated. There was only the mission. There were only the lives. 285 souls on that ship. My voice, when I spoke, was stripped of all emotion. It was cold, clear, and absolute. The voice of command. "We're breaking protocol," I stated. "We don't have time to go through standard fleet command channels. They'll waste an hour debating a threat they can't see. I want a direct, anonymous signal injected into the Courageous navigation system. Priority Alpha. Directive is a non-negotiable course correction to heading 090. Effective immediately. No questions, no confirmations. Just execute." "Sir, a direct injection is a major violation," Marcus stated, his voice a trained, cautionary tone. "If we're wrong, this is our careers. Court-martial. If we're right and we do nothing, it's 285 funerals." I shot back. "Mask the signal's origin. Bounce it off a commercial satellite. Make it look like a damned atmospheric anomaly, a sensor ghost, a solar flare. I don't care. Just get that ship turned around. Now. Yes, sir, they said in unison. The next 3 minutes were the longest of my life. We watched the blue icon on the screen, kept moving forward, steady on its path to oblivion. 1 minute, 2 minutes. My jaw was clamped so tight I could feel my teeth grinding. I was living an entire lifetime in the space between heartbeats. Then, it happened. The icon wavered. Then it began a slow, deliberate turn, moving away from the unseen line of fire. It was working. 30 minutes later, the missile battery went live. We watched as its targeting radar swept the empty patch of ocean where the Courageous should have been. It swept once, twice, then it went dark. Their window of opportunity had closed. They were safe. My brother was safe. They would log it as a strange navigational glitch, a ghost in the machine. A story to tell over beers. They would never know. In the bone-chilling quiet of the tank, there were no cheers. No congratulations. Just the quiet hum of the servers. I finally leaned back in my chair, the immense tension draining out of me, leaving me hollow and profoundly tired. Sam finally broke the silence. "They're clear, sir." Hell of a call. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I had saved my brother's life and cemented my status as a ghost, a non-entity in my own family's story. Now, back at the ceremony, General Miller's voice pulled me from the icy depths of the memory. He was nearing his conclusion. To lead these new battlefields, to command in this silent war, the Navy requires a new breed of leader. A leader with the vision to see the threats others miss. A leader with the moral courage to make decisions that will never be understood, let alone celebrated on a parade ground. He paused, and his eyes, across the vast expanse of the hall, found mine. It was a look that conveyed more than words ever could. It was a look of shared knowledge, of profound respect. Today, it is my distinct honor to recognize such a leader, as he officially steps into a role he has earned a dozen times over, a role vital to the future of this Navy and the security of our nation. The atmosphere in the room was electric. My father was now looking at my mother with open confusion. Ethan was scanning the rows of senior officers, desperately trying to figure out who the general was talking about. They were still blind. They were standing on the beach, arguing about seashells, completely oblivious to the tsunami that was just about to break over their heads. The general let the silence stretch, a conductor holding the orchestra at the peak of a crescendo. He commanded the room not with volume, but with the sheer weight of his presence. My family, who had been the center of attention just moments before, were now adrift in a sea of confusion. The neat, predictable script of their day had been torn to shreds, and they didn't have the new pages. "The responsibilities of command are immense," General Miller continued, his voice now lower, more intimate, as if he were sharing a profound secret with the 1,000 people in the hall. "But the burden of silent command is a unique weight. To know of a victory that you cannot share. To carry the knowledge of lives saved in secret, without thanks or recognition. This requires a form of fortitude that is not forged in the heat of battle, but in the cold, quiet corridors of absolute certainty." He picked up a slim, official-looking folder from the podium. It was bound in dark blue leather, stamped with the seal of the Secretary of the Navy. It was a prop, but a powerful one. It was a tangible symbol of a world my family couldn't access. For years, the United States Navy has benefited from the service of an officer whose work has been so critical, so sensitive, that his many successes have, by necessity, been his own burden to bear. His name has been the classified footnote in after-action reports that have directly influenced global events. He has been the unseen architect of victories that many of us in this room have celebrated, without ever knowing the architect's name. My father's jaw was now a hard, tight line. I could see him from across the hall, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He was a man who lived by a clear chain of command and visible results. He hated ambiguity, and General Miller was drowning him in it. My mother's polite smile was now a frozen, brittle thing. She kept glancing from my father to the stage, her eyes wide and searching, no longer a participant but a confused spectator. And Ethan, my golden boy brother, had stopped looking smug. He looked pale. The general's words, "A crisis that is averted, a ship that never sails into a trap," were clearly echoing in his mind, colliding with the stories he had told himself and everyone else about his own charmed career. He was starting to connect dots he never knew existed, and he did not like the picture that was emerging. This was it, the eye of the storm, that terrifying, preternaturally quiet moment before the world is ripped from its foundations. The general was no longer just giving a speech. He was a demolition expert, systematically placing charges at the base of my family's entire belief system. And his explosive was the simple, unvarnished truth. The Secretary of the Navy, upon a recent review of this officer's extensive and impactful contributions which have directly led to the enhanced security of this nation and the physical safety of countless sailors, has authorized a rare and deeply deserved recognition. It is a promotion that is, frankly, long overdue. Promotion, that single word, spoken with such authority, cut through the haze of my family's confusion. A promotion was a concept my father understood intimately. It was the language of his world, the primary measure of a man's worth and progress. Promotions were earned through merit. They were concrete. The general gave a slight nod. His aide, a sharp young lieutenant named Grace Kim, whom I had worked with on several joint service projects, stepped forward. She wasn't carrying a medal case. She was carrying a small, square, velvet-lined box. The kind of box that held something far more significant than a piece of decorated ribbon. It held rank. It held power. In that instant, my own senses became preternaturally sharp. I saw my Uncle Robert lean forward in his seat, the slightest hint of a grim, satisfied smile touching his lips. He wasn't just a guest. He was a witness to a historic course correction. I saw Dr. Chun, the civilian expert from the security gate, now seated in the front row as an honored guest. Her expression was no longer one of pity, but of keen, professional fascination. She was a world-class analyst, and she was putting the pieces of the puzzle together with breathtaking speed. And me? I felt a strange and total calm wash over me. The low simmering anger that had been my companion for decades had finally burned itself out. In its place was a quiet, powerful clarity. This wasn't about proving my father wrong. It wasn't about shaming Ethan. It was about allowing the truth to occupy the space it had always deserved. The truth had a gravity all its own, and it was about to bend my family's universe around it. The general's aide opened the box with a quiet click. Inside, resting on the dark velvet, was a single polished silver star, the rank insignia of a rear admiral lower half. My father, the retired captain, saw it. I saw the moment of recognition in his eyes, even from 100 feet away. I saw his body go rigid with disbelief. A captain, an 06, is a senior officer, a position of great respect. But an admiral, an 07, an admiral is a flag officer. An admiral is part of the Navy's senior leadership. An admiral gives orders to entire flotillas of captains. It was a rank my father had respected, dreamed of, but never attained. It was a stratosphere he had never believed his bookish, awkward son could ever hope to reach. The aide then held up a formal document. Her voice, crisp and formal, cut through the stunned silence of the hall. By order of the President of the United States, and upon the recommendation of the Secretary of the Navy, for extraordinary merit and a distinguished record of service in a position of great responsibility, Captain Michael Hayes, United States Navy, is hereby appointed to the rank of Rear Admiral. She said my name, Captain Michael Hayes. The entire hall seemed to inhale as one collective, silent gasp. My family was frozen, utterly, completely frozen. It was as if a film had stopped on a single shocking frame. Their heads, almost comically, turned in unison. They looked away from the stage, their eyes scanning the crowd, searching for the man who bore my name. And then their eyes found me, standing in the shadows at the back of the hall. The desk jockey, the paper pusher, the son who wasn't on the list, the man they had left outside. The storm was no longer gathering. It was about to break. The silence that followed the aide's announcement was not empty. It was a physical presence, a heavy blanket of pure shock that smothered every other sound in the hall. 1,000 people, and you could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Every single eye, which had been on the stage, was now a laser beam locked onto my position at the back of the room. My father's face was a study in disintegration. The proud, commanding facade of Captain David Hayes crumbled in real time, revealing the slack-jawed, ashen-faced bewilderment of a man whose entire worldview had just been torpedoed. My mother's hand was pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning horror that was so profound it bordered on the absurd. And Ethan, my brother, the golden child. His face was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Confusion warred with disbelief, and both were being overrun by a rising tide of cold, sickening realization. He was trying to reconcile the words Rear Admiral with the image of the brother he had just so casually and cruelly dismissed. His hand, the one not clutching his own medal, began to tremble. It was a small tremor, but in the supercharged atmosphere of that room, it was a seismic event. The truth had made landfall. General Miller, a master of theatrical timing, let the silence stretch for 1 beat, 2 beats, then shattered it with a voice that boomed with authority. Rear Admiral Hayes, will you please join me on stage? It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. It was an order that publicly and irrevocably confirmed the new reality. Slowly, with a deliberation I did not feel, I began to move. I stepped out of the shadows of the oak tree and into the center aisle. The walk from the back of the hall to the stage felt like 100 miles. I could feel the weight of 1,000 stares, a mixture of curiosity, respect, and utter shock. I kept my back straight, my chin held high. I was not the humiliated son shuffling forward for a scolding. I was a flag officer of the United States Navy, answering a call from my superior. As I walked, I reached up and unzipped my plain civilian windbreaker, the one I had worn to blend in, to hide. I slipped it off my shoulders, folded it neatly over my arm. Underneath, I was wearing my own dress white uniform, the uniform of a captain. It was clean, perfectly pressed, and adorned with a rack of ribbons that told the story of my silent career. A story they had never once bothered to read. The aisle took me directly past my family's row. I did not turn my head. I did not grant them a glance. I didn't have to. I could feel their collective shock like a wave of heat. I kept my eyes fixed forward, on the stage, on the 4-star general, and on the single gleaming silver star that represented a truth they could no longer deny. About halfway to the stage, a figure in the front rows of officers stood up with a sharp, decisive movement. It was Captain Laura Winters, a formidable officer I knew by reputation. She was a surface warfare officer, a ship driver of the old school, and she had served as the executive officer on the USS Courageous during Ethan's tour. She knew what was real and what was noise. As I drew level with her row, she snapped to a rigid position of attention and rendered the sharpest, most impeccable salute I had ever received. Her eyes, clear and unflinching, met mine. In them there was no surprise. There was only a profound, unwavering respect. It was a public and powerful endorsement from one of their own, a signal to the entire naval community in that room that this was not a dream. This was real. Her salute was the breaking of the dam. A ripple of motion swept through the hall. One by one, then in pairs, then in entire sections, the officers in the room rose to their feet. A rustle of fabric, the creak of chairs, a growing wave of bodies standing at attention. By the time my feet touched the bottom step of the stage, the entire room was standing. A sea of blue and white uniforms, a forest of humanity, all on their feet. For me, all except for 3 people. My father, my mother, and my brother remained seated 3 small, stunned islands in a rising tide of respect. Their inaction, their paralysis, made them more conspicuous than any action ever could have. I ascended the steps and came to a halt before General Miller. He smiled, a genuine, deeply proud smile that reached his eyes. He took the new shoulder boards, the ones bearing the single silver star of a rear admiral, from his aide. He leaned in close, his voice a low rumble meant only for me. Time to put these where they belong, Admiral. Long overdue. With a practiced efficiency, He removed the silver eagles of a captain from my shoulders and replaced them with the stars. It was a quiet, deeply personal moment of transformation, happening in the most public way imaginable. He stepped back, gave my new shoulder boards a satisfying tap, and then shook my hand with a firm, powerful grip. Then he turned back to the microphone. He was not finished. The first shockwave had been about my rank. The second was about to be about my actions. Many of you here today know the story of the USS Courageous and its heroic actions in the Persian Gulf 2 years ago, he announced, his voice once again projecting to every corner of the hall. How the ship and its crew displayed remarkable calm and professionalism during a period of extreme tension. Commander Hayes, he said, giving a curt nod toward my brother, was rightly decorated for his crew's exemplary performance. Ethan looked up, a flicker of his old self-importance returning to his eyes. Perhaps this was it. Perhaps this was all just some bizarre, elaborate ceremony to give him additional credit. But today, the general said, and his voice turned to ice-cold steel, I am authorized to declassify the context of that performance. The USS Courageous was not heroic because it stumbled out of danger by luck. It was saved. It was saved because a highly classified intelligence directive, codenamed Operation Blackwater, discovered a new and imminent coastal missile threat and provided a direct, unorthodox warning just minutes before that threat became active. He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over the room. The officer who conceived and commanded Operation Blackwater, who analyzed the torrent of raw intelligence, and who made the lonely, career-risking call to break protocol and issue that anonymous warning. He did so from a secure facility 6,000 miles away, staring at a computer screen. The general paused one last time. He turned his head and looked directly at my brother, at my father. His words were precise, devastating, and aimed with the accuracy of a laser-guided weapon. That officer was the man standing next to me. Rear Admiral Michael Hayes did not just push papers, Commander. He saved your ship. He saved your life. And he saved the lives of your entire crew. If the first revelation had been a shockwave, this was the detonation. The hall erupted. It wasn't just applause this time. It was a roar, a spontaneous, visceral roar of understanding, of awe, of respect for a story of quiet, unseen heroism that was greater than any they had imagined. Through the wall of sound, I looked out at my family. My mother was now weeping openly, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. My father looked as if he had been physically struck. All the color had drained from his face. His mouth was slightly agape, his eyes vacant with an incomprehensible truth. But it was Ethan's face that will be seared into my memory forever. The arrogance was gone, vaporized. The smug confidence was a distant memory. All that was left was a raw, gaping wound of absolute horror. The heroic story he had built his identity on, the story he had told at bars and family dinners for 2 years, was a fraud. Not only was his nerdy, paper-pushing brother an admiral who outranked him into a different galaxy, but he was also the anonymous guardian angel who had plucked him from the jaws of certain death. The man he had mocked less than an hour ago was the sole reason he was alive to do the mocking. The truth hadn't just hit hard. It had erased him and rewritten him in a single brutal paragraph. The applause thundered on, but I barely heard it. I just stood on that stage under the bright lights, looking at the complete and utter wreckage of my family's pride. And the strangest emotion washed over me. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy. It was a profound, aching sadness. It had never, ever had to be this way. All they ever had to do was ask. All they ever had to do was care enough to listen. The end of the ceremony was a chaotic blur of motion and sound. I was immediately surrounded. Hands reached out to shake mine, backs were clapped, and a chorus of congratulations, Admiral, echoed around me. Officers I had only known as names on a secure email chain came forward to introduce themselves, their faces alight with a new, tangible respect. Captain Winters, the formidable XO of the Courageous, gave me a firm, decisive nod. "It's about damn time, Admiral," she said, her voice low and laced with satisfaction. Some of us knew. Dr. Chun, the civilian analyst, approached with a small, wry smile. "Congratulations. she said simply. That was exceptionally clarifying. I moved through the sea of well-wishers with a strange sense of detachment, my mind operating on a separate parallel track. I wasn't basking in the glory. I was scanning the room, looking for them. I finally located them in a small, private reception area off the main hall. A room reserved for honored guests and flag officers. A room where, just a few hours ago, I would not have been welcome. They were huddled in a corner, a miserable trinity of shame. My mother had stopped crying, but her face was blotchy and puffy, her makeup a faint watercolor mess. My father was staring intently at a painting of John Paul Jones on the wall, as if trying to draw strength from a long-dead hero because his living sons had failed him in such spectacular, opposite ways. And Ethan was pacing. He wore a track in the plush carpet, his hands opening and closing at his sides, a caged animal whose cage had just been revealed to be of his own making. He spotted me as I entered the room. He stopped pacing and jabbed a trembling finger in my direction, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "You," he hissed, his voice a ragged whisper that was somehow more venomous than a shout. "You planned this, all of it. You did this just to humiliate us." I stood just inside the doorway, my hands clasped calmly behind my back. I felt the familiar, hot flush of a lifetime of anger, but my voice, when it emerged, was as cool and steady as a deep ocean current. "No, Ethan, you humiliated yourself at the gate this morning. I just arranged for the truth to have a front row seat." "The truth?" he scoffed, his voice cracking with a hysterical edge. "You call this the truth? You lied to us. For years, you lied by omission. You let us think you were nothing." "I never lied about a single thing," I countered, my voice sharp enough to cut through his rising panic. "I am an officer in the United States Navy. I told you that. You're the one who added the dismissive adjectives. You're the ones who decided my work was nothing, because it didn't involve getting a suntan on a ship's deck." I took a slow, deliberate step into the room. "Answer me this, Ethan. Did you ever, in all these years, ask me a single specific question about what I did? Did you ever ask what project I was leading? What my actual day-to-day responsibilities were? Or did you just assume you already knew?" He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a deck. He had no answer because there was no answer. My father finally peeled his gaze away from the painting. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. The ironclad certainty that had been his armor for 70 years had been stripped away, leaving behind a frail, bewildered man. "You're an admiral?" he asked, his voice a hollow, disbelieving whisper. It wasn't a question seeking confirmation. It was a man trying to recalibrate his entire universe. "Yes, Dad, I am." The door opened then, and General Miller strode in, followed closely by my Uncle Robert. The general was holding a short glass of what looked like very expensive whiskey. He surveyed the tense family tableau with the neutral, assessing gaze of a master strategist. "Everything all right in here?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. Ethan, emboldened by a fresh surge of misplaced anger, rounded on him. This was your doing. You set us up." General Miller took a slow, deliberate sip of his whiskey, his eyes never leaving Ethan's. "I facilitated a promotion ceremony for a subordinate officer, Commander," he said, his voice mild but with an underlying edge of steel. "A ceremony that was, as I said, long overdue." He took another step into the room, and his friendly demeanor evaporated, replaced by the chilling authority of a 4-star general addressing an errant junior officer. "And I strongly suggest you adjust your tone when speaking to a superior officer. In fact, you're in the presence of 2 of them right now. I suggest you remember that." The words hit Ethan like a physical slap. His military training, the very foundation of his being, kicked in. His back straightened, his mouth snapped shut, and a dull, red flush crept up his neck. He had been dressed down, and he knew it. My mother, finally finding her voice, tried to play her lifelong role as the family peacemaker. "General, please," she murmured. "This is just a family misunderstanding." General Miller's gaze shifted to her, and it was not kind. Ma'am, with all due respect, what I witnessed at the gate this morning was not a misunderstanding. It was a disgrace. Your family's treatment of one of my finest officers was an embarrassment to the uniform he wears and the oath you all claim to honor. My mother recoiled as if burned. No one had ever spoken to her with such bluntness. Uncle Robert, who had been a silent, grim-faced observer, finally spoke. He wasn't looking at Ethan or my mother. He was looking directly at his brother. I tried to tell you, David, he said, his voice heavy with the sorrow of decades. Years ago, at that damn barbecue, I tried to tell you the kid was special, that his work mattered. You wouldn't listen. You were too busy polishing your own legend. My father flinched, the words finding their mark. He looked from his brother to me, his face a canvas of regret and confusion. He had no defense. As this family drama reached its agonizing peak, my encrypted satellite phone vibrated with a unique, urgent pattern against my hip. I pulled it out. The screen glowed with a priority alpha message. A new threat was emerging on the other side of the world. A friendly asset was in jeopardy. My duty wasn't in this room, sifting through the emotional wreckage of the past. It was out there in the immediate, dangerous present. I looked up from the phone. They were all still caught in their private hells, staring at me as if I held the answers. I have to go, I said, my voice calm and final. My mother's head snapped up. Michael, wait, we need to talk. I can't, I said, my voice firm but without malice. It was a simple statement of fact. I have work to do. And with that, I turned on my heel and walked out of the room. I left them there with the unvarnished truth, with their gaping wounds of pride, with the imposing presence of General Miller, and the sad, vindicated eyes of my Uncle Robert. My exit wasn't a dramatic flourish. It was my life. The work they had mocked and belittled for so long was calling. And in that moment it was more important than their anger, more vital than their regret, and far more real than any apology they might one day manage to offer. Leaving them to their silence was the loudest statement I had ever made. A year can change a man, can also, with enough force, begin to change a family. The 12 months that followed that day at the academy were a slow, arduous process of rebuilding. Not just for them, but for me as well. I threw myself back into the silent war. A new crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, a sudden cyber threat to our Pacific fleet, the endless, intricate dance of global intelligence. The work was a refuge, a place where the rules were clear and my value was measured in results, not in the biased opinions of my father. For the first 3 months, there was a profound silence from my family. No angry phone calls, no pleading emails, just a void. I later learned from Uncle Robert that they were in a state of collective shock, unable to process the new reality. They didn't know how to talk to me anymore. The old roles were shattered, and they hadn't figured out the new ones. I didn't push. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting by the phone for a crumb of approval. I was an admiral. I had a command. My worth was an established fact, not a point of negotiation. The first crack in the ice came from an unexpected source. My father. He didn't call me. He called his brother, Robert. Your father called me last night, Robert told me over the phone, his voice tinged with a weary sort of wonder. We talked for almost 2 hours. First real conversation we've had since that godforsaken 4th of July barbecue 10 years ago. He asked me to explain what you do. He wanted to know what signals intelligence really was. He wanted to know how it worked. I was silent, trying to picture it. My proud, stubborn 70-year-old father, the man who believed all problems could be solved with sufficient tonnage and firepower, humbling himself enough to ask his younger brother for a lesson in a world he had always disdained. What did you tell him? I finally asked. I told him you're the guy standing on the mountain who sees the whole battlefield, while the rest of us are in the valley fighting what's in front of us. I told him you're the guy who prevents wars, not just the guy who fights them. I think he's starting to get it, Mike. He's an old ship. He turns slow. But he's turning. And he was. That Christmas, when I went home, the atmosphere in the house was transformed. The air was still thick with 30 years of unspoken history, but the active, suffocating tension was gone. It had been replaced by a strange, awkward reverence. The most shocking evidence of this shift was in my father's study. His shrine to his own naval career had been reconfigured. He had commissioned a new, larger display case of dark cherry wood. His old medals and photos were still there, arranged neatly on one side. But the entire other side was dedicated to me. In the very center, on a velvet-covered stand, was my Distinguished Service Medal. Beside it was a framed photograph of me on the stage, in my admiral's uniform, shaking General Miller's hand. I found him in there, carefully dusting the glass of the case with a soft cloth. He saw me standing in the doorway and straightened up, looking almost like a boy caught doing something he shouldn't. "Michael," he said. The word was quiet, unadorned. "Dad." He gestured awkwardly at the case. "Thought it was time to update the family historical records." He cleared his throat. "I was just reading an article in the Naval Proceedings Journal about the future of asymmetric threats. Seems to be your area of expertise." And so we talked. He tried to use the new vocabulary he had learned from Uncle Robert. He asked about cyber warfare and drone swarm vulnerabilities. It was clumsy, like watching a man who only spoke Latin try to have a conversation in English. He was a man fluent in the language of cannons and destroyers, struggling to learn the complex grammar of my world. It was the most profound, heartfelt apology he was capable of giving. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was a start. The most significant change, however, was in Ethan. A year after the ceremony, he was no longer a commander. He had been promoted to captain and, to my surprise, had been selected for a prestigious course at the Naval War College in Newport, a place where the Navy's future leaders are forged. He came to my office in D.C. to see me. He looked different. The easy, swaggering arrogance was gone, replaced by a quieter, more thoughtful intensity. He was leaner, his eyes holding a depth they hadn't had before. Admiral, he started, stumbling over the title. "Ethan, it's just Mike," I said, waving him to a chair. "It always has been." He sat, but perched on the edge of the seat, unable to relax. I came to ask for your help," he said, the words clearly costing him an immense amount of his remaining pride. "My first major paper is on the future of naval strategy, specifically intelligence integration in fleet-level operations. I've read the declassified report on Operation Blackwater. I've read it a dozen times." He looked me straight in the eye. "I still don't understand how you did it, how you saw it coming when no one else did." So I showed him. I pulled up a whiteboard and, for the next 2 hours, I walked him through my world. I drew diagrams of signal chains and data funnels. I explained how my team used predictive algorithms to find patterns in chaos, how we could sift through petabytes of digital noise, social media chatter, financial transactions, scrambled satellite uplinks, to find the one faint signal that mattered. I explained that true naval strength was no longer just about the number of ships you had, but about the speed and quality of the information you used to deploy them. He listened with a rapt attention I had never seen from him before. He asked smart, insightful questions. For the first time in our lives, we were not the golden child and the scapegoat. We were 2 senior naval officers, 2 professionals, discussing our trade. He was beginning to understand that my world and his were not in competition. They were 2 essential, intertwined halves of the same whole. The sword and the all-seeing eye. Both were necessary for true victory. As he got up to leave, he paused at my office door. He turned back, his face etched with a conflict of emotions. "Mike," he said, his voice low and thick with feeling. "About that day at the academy, and all the years before it. I was a jealous, arrogant ass. I was wrong. I am deeply sorry." "I know, Ethan," I said softly, and I did. The apology wasn't for show. It was real and it was earned. The vast, cold ocean that had separated us for our entire lives was finally starting to recede. We were building a bridge across it, one difficult conversation at a time. My own new beginning came into focus during that same year. I had accepted an invitation to be a guest lecturer at the Naval Academy. As I spoke to a hall full of bright-eyed, brilliant young midshipmen about the future of global conflict, I saw a familiar face in the crowd, Dr. Eleanor Chun. She was now a senior civilian advisor to the Academy's Strategic Studies program. After my lecture, she approached me, a warm, intelligent smile on her face. "Admiral Hayes," she said, "a much better welcome to Annapolis for you this time, I trust." I couldn't help but laugh. "You have no idea, Dr. Chun." "Eleanor," she corrected gently. We walked across the historic campus, the autumn leaves crunching under our feet. We didn't talk about my family. We talked about her work in geopolitical risk analysis, my work in predictive threat modeling. She understood the nuances of my world, the moral ambiguities, the immense pressure. She saw beyond the uniform and the rank. She saw the mind that was constantly working, analyzing, connecting the dots. It wasn't the spark of romance. It was something quieter, rarer, and perhaps more meaningful. It was the spark of true intellectual connection. It was respect. Looking at the faces of the young men and women who would soon lead the Navy, I realized my long, painful journey had not really been about seeking validation from my family. It had been about forging it within myself. Their respect was a welcome, but late, consequence of a war I had already won. The real victory was peace. That crisp autumn afternoon, walking across the grounds of the Naval Academy with Eleanor, felt like the final chapter of one book and the first page of a new one. The conversation flowed effortlessly between us. We weren't making small talk. We were debating the strategic implications of quantum computing on global security, the ethics of autonomous weapon systems. We were two minds engaged in a subject we were both passionate about. We were peers. For the first time in a very long time, I felt completely wholly seen. Not as a son, not as a brother, not even as an admiral, but as Michael. We paused by the seawall, looking out at the gray, choppy waters of the Severn River. Young midshipmen were out on the water in sailboats, learning the timeless lessons of wind and tide. It was a place of beginnings, a place where raw recruits are forged into officers. And in a way, I felt like I was at a new beginning myself. The relationship with my family had found a new, fragile equilibrium. My father and I were still learning to communicate. Our phone calls were often formal, filled with the awkward pauses of men trying to bridge a 30-year gap of misunderstanding. But we were trying. He would send me clippings from defense journals about new surveillance technologies, a clumsy olive branch. I would call him and explain, patiently, why the software that analyzed the data was 1,000 times more important than the camera that collected it. We were building a new language, one word at a time. The healing wasn't complete, but the process had begun. Ethan and I had forged a new kind of brotherhood. It wasn't built on shared childhood memories, which were mostly tainted, but on a hard-won mutual respect for our different, but equally vital roles. He would call me from the War College, not for answers but as a sounding board to debate strategic theory. He was becoming a wiser, more thoughtful leader because he finally understood that the battlefield was more than just the piece of ocean his ship occupied. He saw the whole board now. In the quiet moments of reflection, I finally understood the profound truth of my journey. The validation I had so desperately craved from my family for decades was not something they could ever have given me. It was an internal prize. It had to be one within myself. My worth was never defined by their perception of me, however skewed or cruel. My worth was defined by my actions, by my unwavering commitment to my duty, and by the unseen victories that kept my country safe. The dramatic ceremony, the public revelation of my rank and my actions, that wasn't the victory itself. The real victory had happened 2 years earlier, in the cold, silent darkness of the tank. The victory was the moment I chose to save my brother's ship, fully believing I would receive no credit and that my actions would remain forever in the shadows. The victory was choosing a path of silent, thankless service and staying on that path, even when it earned me nothing but the scorn and dismissal of the people I was supposed to love the most. The respect I now received from my family was simply a late, welcome echo of a war I had already won, alone and in secret. Looking out at the water, I realized my entire life had been governed by a single, simple principle, one that had guided my career and finally brought me peace. Substance over appearance. It is not about the glitter of the medals on your chest, but about the weight of the responsibilities on your shoulders. It is not about the rank on your collar, but about the integrity of your character. It was a truth that had cost me years of pain and alienation to fully grasp, but it was a truth that had, in the end, set me free. My long, quiet war was over, and for the first time in my life, I was truly, deeply at peace. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever felt unseen or had to fight to prove your own worth in a difficult situation? Please share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.